Welcome to episode 90 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. This week, we also welcome Pat Moorhead, our illustrious firm's founder and chief analyst, and we're going to cover a special Mobile World Congress 2022 Barcelona wrap-up, given that the three amigos, we were all there. So welcome.
Yeah, we were.
Pat. Yeah.
Man, it is great to be here. I tell you what, I see all the fun you guys have in the G2 on 5G by More Insight Strategy. And I'm like, I want some of that. And I don't know, maybe I don't know when we agreed to get on here, but I really appreciate the invite. And here we are.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to get started, and then Pat, I'm going to hand it over to you. But obviously, I cover infrastructure and security for the firm. And so I did publish a Forbes article this week. It was my wrap up. It was quite lengthy, about a 10-minute read, but it was action-packed. And from the show, I came away with three themes. And one was obviously private 5G as a service. And that's something that I predicted on a prior podcast. And I want to go into a little more detail about that. There was a lot of discussion around vRAN and Open RAN. No surprise there. And then finally, last but not least, some announcements around carrier services and network enablement from the US tier ones. So let me run through those first. So from private 5G networking as a service perspective, both Cisco and HPE just prior to the show announced their offerings. They are similar. Both Cisco and HPE will supply the core, but they are partnering with companies like Airspan Wireless and Networks actually, and GMA Wireless for the RAN. What's a little bit different about both of these offerings, one, Cisco is going to lean heavily into its very deep and broad IoT capabilities. I think that is spot on, because when you look, in my opinion, at the majority of the addressable market within the enterprise, I guess over 50% of that TAM is going to be in manufacturing automation. So I believe Cisco is very well positioned given their IoT strength. Now, on the other hand, HPE has a lot of strength in a very mature telco organization where they've been delivering a 5G core stack and tremendous depth in both automation and orchestration. And so the HPE offering, no surprise, is part of GreenLake, the IT consumption service model. And Pat, I know you comment quite a bit on IT consumption and you follow GreenLake, but both very strong announcements validating the overall value of deploying private 5G within the enterprise and delivering that as a service. So again, I published a Forbes article. There's more details there if our viewers and listeners want to dive into it. The second area was around vRAN and Open RAN. And so there were a number of announcements. I follow Samsung Networks quite closely. From my perspective, among its incumbent competitors, like in the Ericssons and the Nokias of the world, Samsung has really taken a leadership position in vRAN. And at the show, they announced a vRAN ecosystem that's going to involve a number of partners like Wind River and Dell Technologies, Red Hat, sort of a who's who. And from my perspective, just really reinforces their leadership in leading the vRAN charge. Marvell and Dell had an announcement as well, where Dell actually collaborated with Marvell to develop an Open RAN accelerator card. And I think this is a great step for Dell because they've had one toe in the telco space, but about a year and a half ago, they reorganized, they reduced some layers of management. Dennis Hoffman is leading that organization. And this is really a proof point to what I deem a purpose-built telco piece of hardware. So I think it's good for Dell, and I think for them to be able to be competitive with HPE and Lenovo and others, they'll continue to have to focus on that sort of thing. Qualcomm also, and I know, Pat, you're going to talk about Qualcomm, but they announced their X100 5G RAN accelerator card. Prior to Mobile World Congress, there was an announcement with HPE as a lead partner, and at the event, they talked about a relationship with Mavenir, where they're going to help enable Mavenir's Open RAN solution. And then finally, Rakuten Symphony. I don't know if either of you were keeping score on the number of press releases they were issuing, but I think they won the contest there, 12 or 13 announcements with a number of people, AT&T and Cisco. And I've been somewhat suspect of their ability to be competitive in this space because it is born out of Rakuten Japan's stumbles within Open RAN. but certainly all of the announcements at Mobile World Congress, in my mind, really validated market acceptance for, for Rakuten Symphony and that platform. And then finally, talking about carrier services, prior to the event, AT&T announced its private 5G edge solution. No surprise, they're partnered with Microsoft Azure. They announced earlier in the year or late last year, moving AT&T's 5G core to Azure. So this was an expected, kind of next step in development. What I like about this is that AT&T is focused on edge enabling their private 5G service. They're going to offer the flexibility of both public network slicing and CBRS on-go spectrum. And they're focused on very discrete use cases. Now, this is in contrast to Verizon that's been announcing all of this edge enablement with AWS tied to its public network, but it's, they still haven't deployed their mid-band. And that's really where edge, in my mind, is going to be viable and competitive. So, and then finally, to wrap up my summary, right before the event as well, T-Mobile announced its T-IoT initiative. Both Anshel and I believe, Pat, you were a part of that pre-brief as well. But what I like about this approach is that T-Mobile and Deutsche Telekom together are focused on harmonizing the overall sale, deployment, and management of IoT on a global basis. And I think that's really powerful because IoT has tended to be very fragmented and difficult to manage, and it varies region by region. So I know that was a lot of information, but again, I've got a Forbes article out there. Our listeners and viewers can learn more if you want to dig into it. But with that, hey, Pat, I want to hand it over to you.
Yeah. So am I allowed to boomerang on,
yes,
on what you, okay. So first of all, private 5G, I didn't hear anybody talking about that it wasn't going to happen, because it is. And as you talked about Cisco and HPE, and then you've got the carrier enablement here, the only question was how big it is. In fact, you and I were in a meeting where that discussion came out. I know that, but to me, it's a little bit of an inevitability, particularly when you say, hey, I can support 5G throughout, let's say, my warehouse, or I could do 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and have all these signals colliding with each other. So it makes sense. The other thing is from a privacy standpoint, there are some auto companies in Germany that quite frankly don't want their data sitting on a certain carrier equipment maker's gear.
Right. Yeah.
And they shall be unknown here. On the Open RAN stuff, and this was one of my high-level takeaways related to this. This thing's real. It's happening.
Yeah.
Right. It's not this landslide that's happening that, RAN's going to go away immediately. But I'd be surprised come 6G how much standard RAN there will be. And Open RAN, I mean, what an expected cast of characters here. HPE and Dell, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who, Dell, first and foremost, they have a supply chain for anything, including Samsung TVs, I might add.
Right.
And, HP that's kind of a little joke here, but no, in all reality, HP and Dell are the companies you would expect on one angle, and then Cisco on the other is just a kind of a natural for this. But some other stuff that came out. I mean, you hit it, Will. I mean, RAN transformation is accelerating, right? For years, we looked at the core network and we went from proprietary switched to virtualization. And then now we're going from virtualization to cloudification using containers and things like that. And voila, the carriers are at the same point as a modern cloud infrastructure. And that's just where they have to be to compete. They have the agility related to, even 5G, when you add slicing in there, being able to not extract a required $50 ARPU, right, per device, but, 50 cents for this, $500 for this, and, $50 for this. So it scales. 5G reality is inching toward the hype. Listen, we're 3 years in, and we're getting closer. By the way, 5G, and keep me honest on this, guys, is going faster than 4G. particularly on the device side.
Yeah.
And on the network side, I don't think, I would like to see more people out there with millimeter wave. The fact that, you could align yourself with, a company out there that does repeaters, let's say like Movandi, to put millimeter wave at 1/10 the cost of a G Node B is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Managing edge, right? The only way edge works is if you can manage it like you're managing something that's holistic and close. And AI and automation were some key things that I saw in how carriers are going to more effectively manage the edge out there. Wi-Fi 7, a reality. I mean, just as we're took a huge bite of Wi-Fi 6, here we are with Wi-Fi 7. Anshel, I know you are all over this. So those are the big hitters that I saw. Guys, did I miss any there?
No, I mean, you nailed it. I think just one final comment I'll make, Pat, on, you're talking about, the cloudification. This is really going to provide operators, great agility, the ability to be able to stand up networks faster. I agree with you. When we look at the deployment of 5G, it's on an accelerated path relative to LTE. A lot of that is due to just the more inherently virtualized nature of 5G as well.
Yeah. And
security is going to be a concern. The 5G new radio standard has additional security provisions, but I think you're seeing a whole host of companies that are like the Zscalers of the world that deliver cloud-based security that are going to have a play in the telco space as well. So no, you hit all the points very, very well.
Yeah. So swinging around on devices, you may have noticed Apple had an event here, iPhone SE, a low price iPad, a monster dual die connected with TSV for an M1 Ultra. But the thing that pointed out, the thing that stuck out to me was iPhone SE supported low band and mid band, but does not support millimeter wave. And listen, I got that for countries that aren't, in big in rollouts, but I do feel like at least in the US, millimeter wave, we're close to doing that. And I understand it from a perception and a depositioning of it, which says, okay, all these other phones support all the bands. This cheapo at $429 only supports, sub 6 and mid band. I get that, but it kind of fractures what I thought was a pretty good kind of heterogeneous network approach from all the carriers and all the handset makers in the US. I mean, guys, do you think this is kind of a punch in the face of the carriers for not getting their millimeter wave acts together as broad as maybe, Apple wanted it or consumers want it?
I mean, I'll jump in there, and obviously Anshel is the device expert, but Verizon, it's interesting when you look at least in the US, the priorities that the different operators have been focused on. Verizon had millimeter wave to work with, and so they've been focused on their ultra wideband rollout. It's obviously limited, metropolitan areas and that sort of thing. Versus T-Mobile's got kind of the full, kind of spectrum, layer cake, with AT&T having low band and adding some mid band through C band and this auction 110. But I don't know. I'd love to get Anshel's perspective on this. But is it sort of a way to provide some separation from a mid-range phone and a premium phone? A premium phone having millimeter wave capability. What do you think, Anshel?
So I really think this is more of a function of cost more than anything, because they're reusing an old chassis. And there's just not much room to put millimeter wave antennas. Plus, then you have to consider the cost of new antennas. So when you think about all these factors, it makes that cost profile of that device much less attractive. And they're able to still claim that it has 5G. So that way they're able to convince and entice users to upgrade to this new iPhone SE. Because you also have to consider that the type of user that wants to buy this device isn't always looking for the latest in technology and maybe not always the latest and greatest, but they still want to have something that's relatively competitive with what else is out there. And my understanding is this is a 2x2, so this is also going to be less throughput than most other devices in its price class. So you're also paying maybe a little bit more for less 5G performance, but you are getting an A15 Bionic, which is obviously Apple's fastest. So you're kind of compromising there, but we'll see what the actual, ground performance looks like. But, this thing won't be remotely as fast as most other 5G devices out there today.
Yeah.
And Anshel, I have to ask you, where in the heck is this Apple modem? 2.5 years ago, Apple bought a fully functioning Intel modem, 5G modem. And listen, the issue with Apple's modem was not on low band or mid band. It was on millimeter wave. Okay. So wait a second. I would have totally expected this SE to be an Apple modem, or put the Apple modem on the low end new iPad that doesn't have voice. So you're not, doinking around with VoLTE or something like that.
Well, it's a good question. And I had a suspicion and a thought that it might be, or it could be.
So we might not know yet.
There is no definitive answer to what modem is in there. So this could be the first, this could possibly be the first Apple modem, which would explain the lack of millimeter wave. But we don't know. So I think at this point, we're going to have to wait until the device starts shipping in people's hands and they can start tearing it down. I think, having a Snapdragon X60 in here would be very expensive and make it difficult to hit that $429 price point, which might explain the other lacking features of this device. So it's kind of up in the air. I'd be very curious to see if it is Apple Silicon. I feel like they would have talked about it more if it was.
Yeah.
But we'll see, because there's not that many 5G modem vendors out there in the world, so they don't have very many choices.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was Qualcomm from a 5G leadership standpoint. Actually, the three of us were additive to that 5G kind of end-to-end. I think it was a 5 or 6 part series. Will, you did some of it. Anshel, you did some of it. I did some of it. And I guess, kudos to the team here. Will, you had picked, T-Mobile to be a leader in 5G. What?
I did. Yeah. And everyone doubted us. Anshel and I, almost every other industry analyst doubted he and I. And at the end of the day, we were right.
Yeah. So Anshel, you picked Qualcomm to be, the 5G leader, which, by the way, wasn't a shoo-in because the Apple Intel thing hadn't dropped. We hadn't seen a lot of proof of Qualcomm's RF, but here we are. I feel like Qualcomm is running up the score. And let me actually shift back. So right in between Steve Mollenkopf, prior CEO in his regime, he when he transferred then over to CEO Cristiano Amon, said, hey, we're going to diversify, right? We're going to still continue to lead in 5G modems, but we're going to lead in RF. We're going to lead in IoT. We're going to lead in automotive. And I think some people are like, oh, okay, this means, you're not going to be competitive with 5G modems anymore, right? Mm-hmm. People have their doubts. Well, at least based, from talking to you guys, and I know Anshel, you're going to go into some of the details on this. I believe the X70 is paying off on this. And I think, if nothing else, puts Cristiano, in a good light, and the company in a light, in that for about, I don't know, if you go back about 8 years ago, investors were questioning, could Qualcomm deliver on their promises, right? And we saw,
I would say it's like 3 years ago.
And particularly around diversification, like what do you do? It used to be this awesome thing to be affiliated with smartphones. Guess what? If you're affiliated with smartphones, you actually have a discount, particularly if you look across a lot of the different semiconductor makers. So I view this as yet another promise. The other thing that they said is they would lead in premium Android. And I think, at least from a looking at the SKUs that are coming out in premium Android, they're also delivering on that promise too. So with that, I'm going to push it over to you, Anshel, to keep all of us, I don't know, accurate on these things, or call me on anything. I'm open to it.
So my summary of MWC is a little bit more device centric, which obviously makes sense because I'm the device guy. And obviously, I'm also going to talk about some of the chipsets that were announced. And no surprise, this was a big show for Qualcomm. There was also a lot of announcements from MediaTek, but Qualcomm kind of led the charge when it came to chipset announcements. They announced a new Wi-Fi 7 chipset, the Fast Connect 7800, with its a built-in dual connect Bluetooth capability. And then they also announced two wearable Bluetooth chips, the S5 and the S3, for like earbuds. And those will connect to the 7800. And then you also have the X70, which you announced, which you talked about. And that was kind of an update where they integrated AI processing capabilities into the modem, which adds a bunch of new types of intelligence to make the modem more capable of adjusting to network conditions, both for millimeter wave as well as sub-6. So it kind of improved all kinds of user experiences. But there was a lot of talk about millimeter wave specifically because of the differences that occur with beam forming and bounces and all those kinds of things. So the X70 was a big announcement for them. And then on top of that, there was just this mountain of Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 phones that were announced, which was kind of expected because they announced the chip back at Snapdragon Tech Summit in December, and we got this deluge of phones from Oppo. That was the Find X5 Pro, which I have somewhere lying around here. I don't know what I did with it. Oh, it's right here. I've got it right here. There you go. And then nice. We've also got the RealMe GT2. We got some Poco phones from Xiaomi, and then there was the Magic 4 Pro, and they also showed off the V. Those were both from Honor, which is a spin-off from Huawei. They no longer claim that they're part of the company, and they are actually shipping in Europe, and they're using Snapdragon chips. So they also ship with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. And then on top of that, MediaTek announced their new smartphone SoCs. They announced the Dimensity 8000 and 8100, which are designed to kind of slot in between their new flagship, which is the Dimensity 9000, and the 1200, which they had in market already. And the 8000 kind of slots in between and has maybe not the latest ARM IP, but kind of targets a much more mainstream price sector. They also did some Wi-Fi 7 demos, so they'll probably have a Wi-Fi 7 chip coming soon, but they didn't announce any products at the show. And then on top of that, it was kind of like a multitude of announcements and just tons of devices. I would say two devices that were announced that may have not caught everyone's attention were the Lenovo X13S, which is a Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3. It's the first 8CX Gen 3 laptop. And I'm very excited about it because it's a Lenovo ThinkPad. And it's the first ThinkPad with a Snapdragon chip in it. And I think it's the first ThinkPad for Windows on ARM. So I think a lot of people are very excited about that 28-hour battery life. And then I also was pretty excited about the Samsung devices that they launched at the show, which were not smartphones, but they were PCs. And I was really excited about the Galaxy Book 2 Pro. That one's an Intel-based system, and it's very exciting just because it's super light, and it doesn't look as light as you would think it would be until you pick it up and try and use it. But that, as far as devices and chipsets go, then there were a ton of XR announcements. Some of them were 5G related, some weren't. I got to try Holoride finally, and that was with the new HTC Flow headset, where they actually connect the headset to the car, and you have a VR experience in the car as the car's driving around in a virtual reality experience that matches the movement of the vehicle, because Holoride is working with automotive manufacturers to connect your headset with the car so that they can start to offer services like, different types of games and entertainment, so that you aren't just, sitting in your car staring out the window or getting motion sickness staring at your phone. So that was a really cool demo. I hadn't had a chance to do that yet. There were some others like WorldXR, which is like a little mini version of the world that you can have in a Quest headset. Qualcomm also announced a partnership or deepened partnership with Bytedance, which is the parent company of TikTok and Pico. So we're going to see more involvement there where Qualcomm works more closely with them. They also Qualcomm announced a partnership at CES with Microsoft along a similar vein. So we're seeing Qualcomm deepen their XR partnerships with some of the biggest tech companies in the world. And then HP announced a XR platform for managing enterprise VR headsets called Extend XR. And they were kind of showing that off at the show, as well as, giving people demos of their VR headset using this platform. So it was a very busy show in terms of devices and XR and chipsets. It felt like a regular MWC for me, maybe a little bit lighter than usual, which honestly, I think the crowd was just about right in terms of the amount of people.
I agree. I think the GSMA said that at the end of the day it was 61,000 people. So I thought the same thing. I mean, both you and Pat have talked about Qualcomm. I want to mention just one thing from an infrastructure perspective. I'm impressed with how they have been focused on moving up into infrastructure, starting with small cells. They've been doing that a year and a half plus. And at this event, I mentioned the accelerator card. They're getting more and more, entrenched into the infrastructure space, and where they can really play is, in that disaggregated RAN. So I just wanted to, sort of punctuate what both you and Pat have been saying about Qualcomm, but it just seems like they're firing on all cylinders, and and arguably, they're really driving, the ecosystem from a silicon perspective, as well as Marvell. I spoke to Marvell and the Dell relationship as well, but Qualcomm continues to impress.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Anshel, there was a lot of device stuff and chip stuff out there. Were there any macro things you walked away with, particularly on the devices, something that's different? Are we reaching kind of peak smartphone here at some point of view, and the smartphone makers are going to have to come up with something different? I mean, I love my my S22 Ultra. The one feature I can say that it takes advantage of is better night vision. Now, I don't think that's a reason for somebody to upgrade from S21 Ultra, but maybe to go from an S20 or something like that. Maybe you've been waiting around for Note. Just curious, broad spectrum. Have you seen anything demonstrably different aside from bigger, better, faster across the spectrum of smartphones the last 2 months?
Yeah, I would say what we're seeing is I think the best company to watch in terms of what the market trend will be is Samsung. I think this S22 Ultra is a really good demonstration of that, because they've gone and taken their Note series and folded it into the S series, and all of their brick phones are now going to be in the S series. There will be no more Notes, I believe. Yeah. And I think they're going to do this dual launch where you get this in the spring and then you get a foldable in the fall. And I think the foldables are going to be the new premium tier. You saw it from Honor. TCL showed a ton of foldable demos at the show, no products, but they're also working on them. I was able to finally play with the Oppo Find N, which also launched fairly recently. That's a different foldable. It's much smaller, but it folds into a very compact form factor. So I think you're going to actually see tons more innovation in the foldable space with different form factors satisfying different types of users. And I think you're going to see, maybe a bigger device where it goes from a tablet into a PC, which was kind of being rumored by Apple. That might happen with Apple. So I think foldables are going to be where innovation happens.
Smart answer.
And I think innovation within foldables, because right now, this is the latest and greatest foldable, right?
It's thick.
But it's thick, right? And on top of that, it doesn't have remotely as good of a camera array. So I think there's still lots of room for improvement in foldables. And I think foldables is going to be where all the innovation happens moving forward. That said, it's, the lack of periscopes on other phones really makes me not want to use them because I'm so used to having the crazy zoom that this phone has.
Yes. Yes. No, that's good. I appreciate that. And I don't know if I just broke the rules of the G2 on 5G, but there
are no rules.
We have
that's
no
good.
rules.
No, that's good.
But it's been a great conversation, guys. Pat, thanks for joining. Your insights are always spot on. Anshel, why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to reach out and provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Pat is at Patrick Moorhead, Will is at Will and Tech, and I'm at Anshel Saad. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune again next week.